Welcome to Pirate Politics, where we prepare for your next political conversation. I'm Jeronimo Cortina.
And I'm Brandon Rottinghaus. We're political science professors at the University of Houston. We had so much fun on primary night, Jeronimo, that we decided to go into overtime.
Why not?
Why not? Let's keep talking about it. Honestly, there was so much going on.
Yep.
We thought initially the primary would be kind of boring, but we were totally wrong. There's a lot of storylines that are happening. And of course, we know that it's not the end of it because we're going to do this all again in May when we have a historic number of runoffs.
Yep.
So let's start at the top. We had tremendous turnout. This was breaking records in Texas. The Democrats increased their turnout by about 200%, Republicans by about 120%. So there was a significant enthusiasm for this, largely driven by the Senate race. But obviously, there's something happening in Texas. What does this tell us about what's going on and how it relates to kind of national trends?
Well, it's one effect of political polarization, midterm, Trump administration 2.0. And obviously, there has been a lot of what national politics have contributed to state-level politics. And also, obviously, state-level politics have also contributed to motivate voters to go either way, one for the Democratic primary or the Republican primary. So I think it's just an indication that people seem to be paying attention and that people seem to be picking their winners based on their political or policy positions.
Yeah, I think you're right, too, about the Trump administration. People are obviously excited about this. They want to weigh in on it, and the only time they can do it is this way. It's odd they're doing it in a primary because it's such a rare thing that people vote in primaries, but here we are, and that turnout definitely has implications. Now, it's too soon to tell whether that turnout means that November is going to be a big turnout, but if you model this in a way that you can expect to see the kind of relationship between the primary and the general unfold, it's very possible that the Democrats have added between 300,000 and 500,000 new potential voters. They're having more people to talk to, and that means that they're going to be in a better position. Whether it means Texas will turn blue in the general, we don't know, but for sure the opportunity is there, and it's looking the way that they wanted it to look. We'll certainly talk about the Senate race as that, but a lot of swing vote constituencies are also breaking towards the Democrats by about 3-1. If you look at some of these numbers in terms of how people have traditionally voted or whether they've ever voted before, there's a lot of shift here. Among non-primary voting independents who voted for the first time, 72% chose the Democratic primary and 27% chose the Republican primary. So if independents are going to back Democrats, that's a huge gain. We'll talk a lot more about the Hispanic vote, but 74% broke for the Democrats in this primary. South Texas voters, same 72% broke for the Democrats. Independent Hispanic voters, 83% towards the Democrats. So if you're looking at this from an optimistic perspective, this does look good for Democrats in terms of what's to come. Now, of course, motivation matters, messaging matters, and of course, money matters. So all these things have to be in place, in November for this to operate. But if you're a Democrat, I think you're looking at this and you're pretty happy with some of those outcomes. But let's talk about some specific races because obviously that's going to drive much of the turnout. We talked a little bit last week about the primary and the Republican and Democratic sides, top of the ticket. That's largely the brass ring. Everyone's motivated by that. What were your top takeaways from those races?
Well, I think, as we said last week, one of the key things was of the reality in terms of voting and then what the polls were saying, right? So it's not worth even repeating that, but I think that indicates that we have to be very careful in terms of how we interpret polls when they're polling. And granted, polls are just a picture of that day, but also we have to be mindful that public opinion swings just like that do not happen, right? At least, let's say, 100 years of public opinion research has never, ever suggested that. So that's one issue. The other issue, I think it's very important, is the geographic distribution of the vote for both the Republican and the Democratic primary. When you look at the maps, you see that Talarico did a very good job in I guess, expanding his campaign operation all over the state, and perhaps was not very good in urban centers. And then, on the other hand, we see that John Cornyn did better in urban centers on average than Ken Paxton, right? The Texas Triangle was won by Cornyn in comparison to Paxton that had, a wider reach in other non-big urban centers.
Yeah, it's interesting because the turnout in rural areas in 2024 was higher than in urban areas. Right. We might see that switch, and that's not surprising in a midterm year. But it's interesting to see that could be the tale of how this goes down. Tallarico, I think, ran a good campaign. Obviously, there's some internal churn about how the campaign was going to unfold, who was a better candidate in the general. That debate took place largely online, including a lot of people who weren't from Texas. So obviously, there's going to be some need to mend that fence, and it's going to be a very expensive race on both sides. We could see this setting records, and I'm not surprised that this has already set records for a primary, and that's to the tune of about $110 to $120 million. I think that Crockett didn't run a great campaign. We mentioned this last week. She didn't get a jump start as Tallarico did. She didn't engage in the kind of fundamental campaign tactics that you have to in a place like Texas to buy up ads in these media markets to get a good ground game. There are a lot of people who also, and I want to get your take on this, said that like the late Harris endorsement of Crockett actually hurt her. What do you think about that? I'm surprised that this has become a point of contention, but there's so much bad blood with Kamala Harris that perhaps it just became a kind of instant negative. What do you think?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it was, first of all, super late.
Yeah, really late. Yeah, even after early voting had started, right?
So I don't know if it was something that helped Crockett or not. Yeah. I think that when you're talking about the Texas electorate, right, even Democrat voters are not your liberal Democratic voter in other states tend to be a little bit more conservative. I don't know if at the end, right, because this is a primary electorate, at the end in the general election, if that's going to motivate a lot of other voters, right? So I mean, Jasmine Crockett got 1 million votes, right? Which is not bad. Tallarico got like around 1.2, 1.18 or whatever it is, million votes. But you have to start thinking about the other million, right? How can you bring, especially in urban areas, how are you going to bring these folks into the fold in such a way that they don't feel abandoned or something like that?
That's so true.
That's going to be especially important. And Tallarico has an advantage that he doesn't have to go to a runoff.
Yeah, that's great. No, he can spend that time raising money.
And the money.
Building momentum and mending fences. And he needs to.
Yep.
I mean, Jasmine Crockett carried 5 of the biggest counties in Texas with the biggest black populations. The only one that he carried was Bexar County.
Right.
That is, I think, by itself a need and a real wake-up call for the Tallarico folks. The good news is they've got a lot of money to be able to potentially do it. Another problem for her was that, like, external money didn't show up for her, but they did for Tallarico. He had a 3-month head start. He outraised her in like hard money, but he also basically had a lot of outside money, about $8 million from the Lone Star Rising PAC, and only about $1 million for her from the kind of Crockett Texas Forward PAC. So the money really mattered here. The jumpstart really mattered, and at the end of the day, that's the kind of way that you win Texas. So in a sense, this is sort of what Democrats are going to face, and if they can recreate that, then they can be successful. But for Democrats on the Republican side, looking across the aisle, this is really the dream scenario. They go to a runoff in that race. You've got John Cornyn, you've got Ken Paxton, both with the willingness to get into the ring, mix it up, throw some punches, and get very, very bloody. That's what this is going to end up being. John Cornyn edges Paxton by just a little bit, but it's going to be a bare-knuckle, just mega primary battle.
I mean, now it's going to be concentrated attacks over and over and over and over and over and over and over. And
which Cornyn could very well still lose. I mean, they could spend another, $60 million, $70 million and still not come out ahead on this, because it's just the case, I think, that Cornyn has hit his ceiling. And in a runoff where you're going to have a lot fewer people vote, this is a scenario where we've seen insurgent Republicans do really well against establishment figures.
Oh, absolutely. And Paxton, whatever you want to say about Paxton, he has a very, very, very disciplined following, right? And regardless of what he says, does or doesn't do, people are going to support him.
Yep, they'll be in his corner.
Yep.
Let's talk about other races, because there's a lot of stuff happening down ballot. We talked about a lot of runoffs. Let's talk about some of them at the statewide level. At the Attorney General's race, Middleton, MAGA Middleton, as he self-proclaimed himself, pulled pretty far ahead of Chip Roy. Chip Roy in the polling, like you mentioned a minute ago and last week, was way ahead.
Yeah,
and it turns out that
it
was basically totally flipped. That was a pretty interesting race. On the Democratic side, you have Nathan Johnson, who again was supposed to finish second, ends up finishing ahead of former Galveston Mayor Joe Jaworski, but it obviously is going to be decided by voters in a few months. So what do you make of that race? That got pretty nasty, and I suspect it's going to get even nastier on the Republican side.
Well, yeah. I mean, once again, you have Senator Mays Middleton. He's still a senator?
State senator, yes. Yeah.
But not anymore, right?
No, he had to resign.
Oh, he resigned, yeah. I don't know. I get always confused.
There's a million.
In terms of the timing, you are, but you're interim. Anyways.
No, Dan Patrick already picked who's going to replace him in the Senate, so that's all said and done. Yeah.
Gotcha. All right, fair enough. So here, once again, we see these geographic divide, right? We see starting, let's say, Austin to the left, Chip Roy won. Austin to the right and up, Mays Middleton won. Yeah. One of the advantages or the key things here is you don't have the Cornyn-Paxton battle, right? You have two, let's say, anti-establishment, rogue operators, self-made, et cetera, coming tete-a-tete, right?
Yeah.
That's face-to-face.
There you go. Wow. Translate that for,
don't speak
we should have that on the screen. It's like.
In parentheses. Right. But that's going to be very important. Yeah. Chip Roy can potentially get a lot of money. Yeah. I don't know if it's going to be enough money to compete against Middleton.
I mean, Middleton's got his own war chest that he can spend of his personal dollars to get that done, and that's going to be pretty important. Middleton has come hard against these folks, especially Chip Roy, who he said is not aligned closely enough with Donald Trump, right? Obviously, Roy was one of the people who voted to certify the 2020 election results, which is like an apostasy in the MAGA movement. Right. So that is going to be a problem for him. And he had the serious words with Ken Paxton, ends up quitting and whistleblowing on the Attorney General. I think Ken Paxton could get involved in this race, and it could tip it to Mays Middleton. So Middleton, to be honest, ran a hard campaign, vicious, but it could very well be effective. So that's interesting.
But on the other hand, Chip Roy brings that independence one way or the other, right? That the MAGA following or MAGA conservatives or very conservatives really like. I mean, just look at Don Huffines, right? We're going to talk about that.
No. Let's talk about that right now. Huffines wins the controller's race. He beat a couple of established figures, right? Christy Craddock, who is the railroad commissioner chair, and he beat the kind of incumbent, basically, Kelly Hancock, who was Abbott's hand-picked successor.
Yep.
So here Huffines is going to be kind of a thorn in Greg Abbott's side. Collectively, they spent $16 million for this race, which is stunning for an office that no one's ever heard of. Right. The comptroller is extremely important because they're the ones who certify the budget. They're the ones who basically track the money to see how much the ledge has to spend. Normally, it's about counting beans, but this is a pretty important race because this is going to be the cornerstone of how the new public ed accounts are influenced and whether or not, the money is going to be spent properly. He's promised to basically doge all of Texas government. That could be a headache for Greg Abbott going forward. And the fact that he and Abbott don't see eye to eye, and Huffines was a former opponent of Abbott in an election cycle for governor a few years ago, means that it could be pretty interesting fireworks come next legislative session.
I mean, absolutely, because the role of the controller is saying you have this much money to spend.
Yeah.
That's one. They certify that.
Yeah.
And then the legislature say, okay, fine, I have $100 and I'm going to spend it this way.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, the other thing that you just pointed out is extremely important because is about waste. And Don Huffines has a very particular vision of how government should spend money, which may not align, right, with the current thing.
Yeah.
I mean, asking very, very obvious things, right? Should we spend, given that we have public education, should we spend in educational vouchers? Maybe yes, maybe not, right? He brings that spending view to the foil that not necessarily aligns well with, let's say, a political agenda. So that could become especially very, very complicated.
Watch this space. I think this is going to be the most interesting political friction that we're likely to see
in years.
The next legislative session. So let's talk about, though, a success story for Greg Abbott. He backed Nathan Sheets in the race for Ag Commissioner. You may have tasted Nathan Sheets' honey.
Yes.
This became a political issue because Sid Miller said that the honey is not pure. It's cooked and there's stuff added to it. So it's funny to see how like an ag race gets devolved into a story about how good the candidates' honeys are. Right. But Sid Miller went down. This was an interesting race because, like I said, Nate Sheets got the endorsement from Greg Abbott. He got the endorsement from Don Buckingham and also like the Farm Bureau. And honestly, I know way too much about the ag commissioner position because from my Rick Perry book, like this is sort of the kind of way that Perry got started, and whoever the Farm Bureau picks is who wins.
Right.
And once they endorsed Sheets, it was pretty clear that's the way it was going to go. So he ends up beating Miller pretty badly.
Yeah.
Miller out of a job. I mean, this is a kind of stalwart of Texas politics. He was among that cohort elected in 2014 and has been in office ever since, and now is out of a job.
Well, maybe he goes and works for the Trump administration. Who knows?
That's a good point.
I mean, he has been...
And he got the Trump endorsement, which didn't seem to matter. It was late, but it didn't seem to matter.
Sure, but it didn't matter. And this is one of the offices in Texas where you can see a very well-organized group going one or the other. And Texas agriculture and farming... I guess has been up and down. There has been a lot of problems, especially with the tariffs. There has been a lot of problems in terms of exporting a lot of goods produced here in Texas, even cattle. There's a lot of problems with grazing areas. There's a lot of problems with importing or exporting cattle, processing and exporting it again. So maybe a fresh pair of eyes, and let's see.
Perhaps the ledge didn't trust him. They took away a lot of his powers.
Yep.
Yeah, he was kind of outspoken on things that they didn't like. So I think a lot of people are kind of happy to see him gone, but not Donald Trump, who, kind of picked wrong on this one. Let's talk about the Railroad Commission race. Jim Wright is the incumbent, and Beau French, who we've talked about several times, basically pushed him to a runoff. That's an interesting race. This, of course, included regulatory stories about the oil and gas industry, which is what the Railroad Commission actually does, but also included a clash over China and diversity rules. Obviously, is a kind of modern take on the Republican Party politics. Beau French has been extremely outspoken. We've talked all about his outlandish comments on social media. He's been chastised by his own party for these kinds of things.
And
this
then
could be a pretty
forgotten
race.
And forgiven.
Seems like
apparently.
So. Yeah. Let's talk about the lieutenant governor's race. Vikki Goodwin headed to a runoff, which is really interesting. Her opponent in that is a union official, and Vélez. He's got a little bit of a momentum here. She didn't run a great campaign. Obviously, they're going to have to take on Dan Patrick, who won his primary overwhelmingly, and it could be pretty interesting to see how the Democratic Party kind of shifts along those lines. What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, it's going to be interesting, especially because you have people with experience, and once again, Democrats may have the 2018 2.0 repeated, right?
Yeah.
So I guess they know that.
Yeah.
Presumably.
Right.
So this is the time to get into that coattail and perhaps break the spell of not winning a statewide election in 30-something years.
That's a good point. Yeah, like a lot of this is going to be driven by the top of the ticket. But, one thing we learned from 2018 was that it wasn't just the top down, it was also the bottom up. The Democrats had competitive candidates all across the board, and the kind of ginning up of support really did work its way upward. So they need to have good candidates in these positions for sure. So these primaries, I think, are telling for that, and the runoffs will be really instructive in terms of like who they're going to pick for these things. So let's talk about some of those down ballot races. A bunch of these U.S. House races went to runoffs, including here in Houston. Christian Menefee, who was presumed to win by a pretty outstanding margin, didn't. He ended up getting more votes than Green, but it's going to likely go to a runoff. Amanda Edwards, who was still on the ballot because of the quirkiness of the calendar, got about 7% of the vote. That may have pushed it into a runoff, but also largely what's going on here is that the little sliver of 18 in Fort Bend County voted overwhelmingly for Al Green. That was part of his old district, which was among his core base of support. So that's going to go to a runoff. Another election for these folks who were so blessed with democracy. They're going to vote like 8 times in the last 1.5 years.
And this election, I mean, the runoff in May, especially in this district, given that there is election fatigue, it's going to be a very, very low turnout.
Yeah, I really think so too. Yeah.
So whoever gets more people out.
Literally just your neighborhood, get them to come out. Right? Buy them all Whataburger and like, make it happen. Runoff also in the 23, that's Tony Gonzalez's district. He is in a runoff against Brendan Herrera, the gun rights YouTube star. This was important because, as we've talked about, Tony Gonzalez got snabbed in a scandal where one of his former staffers committed suicide because of an affair. And all of the related issues. That's interesting. Julie Johnson in Dallas is going to run off with Colin Allred. That became a kind of statewide story because Colin Allred jumped out of the Senate race to run there in that. Here in Houston, in Congressional District 9, the new district, Alex Mueller, who got the Trump endorsement over Briscoe Cain, is going to be pushed into a runoff. I want to talk about this because this might be a really interesting race. The fact that this went to a runoff means no one knows who these folks are. Leticia Gutierrez on the other side, the Democratic side, got 50% of the vote, 52% of the vote. This is a Latino opportunity district. Half that district is Latinos. This is one of those districts where the Republicans drew it to be a Republican pickup, but it went, if you look at the numbers, 53% for the Democrats. So this could be a harbinger of like what people call a dummy mander, where you draw lines to try to get your own advantage and then you end up doing it, mistakenly. So this to me could be an interesting general election race, but obviously it's going to go to runoff for the Republicans. Interesting stuff there. And a loss. Dan Crenshaw lost. First incumbent to lose since 2014. Lost to Steve Toth, which we talked about last week.
Outflanked by the right. And it's one of these things that signals the way that the Republican Party is punishing those that tend to deviate or anything like that. But overall, regardless of that, I think that is very dangerous for democracy overall, right? You're elected to represent a district. You're not elected to be aligned with a particular ideology or with a particular point of view. If your point of view in representing your district differs from that of the leadership or the president, or so be it, right? In this case, it is clear that perhaps the constituency of Representative Crenshaw did not like that and went to elect someone more conservative. So I don't know. Again, Republicans may lose a lot of expertise in the conference.
That's a great point.
And that is because the expertise that Crenshaw brings to that in terms of national security, in terms of drug violence, et cetera, was extremely, extremely, extremely good. So he
was also a pretty serious kind of money hub, just collecting and distributing a lot of money to folks, like on his way up the chain in terms of leadership, and now that's all gone. So this is an issue too for Cornyn. If Cornyn loses, he was a serious kind of money hub, and if that goes away, then all that money goes away too. Down ballot, I just noticed this too. Some House moderates like Stan Kitzman and Cecil Bell lost. This isn't statewide news, but they both spent over $1 million. Stan closer to $2 million. Both had Trump endorsements, and so we're likely to see the Republican Party shift to the right in the House just little by little, right? I mean, the last cycle we saw lots of a shift towards the right. Now, kind of little by little, it's moving in that direction. So this is definitely going to change how the legislature operates going forward. But let's talk big picture about two things. Number one, redistricting. Number two, the Latino vote. Like we said, there are several districts of opportunity that the Republicans drew, hoping that they could pick up seats, 28, 34, 35. All of them shifted to the Democrats this round.
Yep.
So, I mean, it's not, of course, a general, and they're voting head-to-head, but if you tally the numbers in terms of turnout, and if it holds, it could be the case that the Republicans end up not getting even maybe one seat out of that whole redistricting enterprise. But I also want to talk about, and keep in mind, too, they spent millions and millions of dollars. But let's talk about the Latino vote. You saw it surge in the Valley, and it certainly broke for Tallarico to the tune of about 66%. That's good news for Democrats, I should think, right?
Yeah, well, absolutely. And one of the things, and we said it in the last election, when people say, well, it's the realignment, and once again, political realignments do not happen in an election, right? We don't know what's going to happen in this midterm election, right? But it shows that the Latino electorate is as sophisticated as other ones. The Latino electorate sided with the Republican Party because the Republican Party was promising or campaigning on issues that were important, not only for Latinos, but also for the general electorate. The economy, affordability, jobs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And within 2 years of the Trump administration, they haven't seen that.
It cratered, right? Support for Trump is basically totally reversed.
And the fact is that now they're used to, especially in the RGB, they're used to not believing political parties that we promise and then disappear and then we promise. They know that, and proof of that, I guess, is Bobby Pulido that also won his bid.
He thinks you don't sing well, but I think he's wrong. What does he know anyway? Grammy Award.
Pretty well, Mr. Pulido. Anytime we can do a duet, I would love to do that, and maybe we'll have it for next week.
Love it.
I'm Jeronimo Cortina.
And I'm Brandon Rottinghaus. The conversation keeps up next week.